If you know anything about smartphone cameras, then you probably know that Vivo makes some of the best options on the market. Right now, there are 3 flagship models you can buy. There's the X200 Ultra, which came out in the summer and is only officially launched in China. Then there's the X300 Pro and its little brother, the X300, which both came out more recently and are available globally. The question is, which one of these phones takes the best photos and videos, and which one should you buy? Today I'm going to put them all head to head and see how they compare, so let's get into it. Alright, so for starters, let's have a quick look at the hardware of these 3 phones. I've got them in size order. I've got the X200 Ultra on the left, X300 Pro in the middle, and X300 on the right. X300 Ultra is the largest, but it's very marginal. There's barely a difference in size between these two. You can just see there, it's a little bit taller and about the same width. Camera bump is a little thicker, and it's definitely more angular as well. Got a sharper radius on this one, whereas there's a slight little curve going into it on the X300 Pro. The X300 that I've got comes in this lovely pearlescent pink color with kind of rainbow hues that go around the camera module, and that does the same thing, even more so. There's more of a sweep up to the camera bump, and it's a much narrower bump on the standard X300 compared to the Pro. In terms of buttons, the X300 Ultra is the only one to come with a camera control button, and I am a big fan of this one. I feel like the positioning is much better on this than it is on the iPhone or the Oppo Find X9 Pro. It's much easier to reach in landscape mode, which is the way I tend to shoot most often. So I'm a big fan of that. But there's no action button or slider on this one. The only one to have that is the X300 Pro. Got an action button up here, no camera control button, just a power button and volume rocker. The X300 keeps things very simple, just a power button and volume rocker, no action button, no camera control. As you might expect, the X200 Ultra is the heaviest, and we get progressively lighter as the phones get smaller. There's a pretty big difference in size between these two. If you like a smaller phone, you'll definitely like the design of the X300. X200 Ultra has these subtle micro curves on the edge of the display and on the rear panel, which you should just about be able to see there, whereas the X300 and X300 Pro are completely flat on the front and back. There's no micro curves, so it's easier to find a good screen protector, which might be important to you. When it comes to battery sizes, it's a little complicated depending on where you live. The X200 Ultra is only released in China officially. It's very easy to import, obviously, but that means there's only one battery capacity. It's 6,000 milliamp hours. The Vivo X300 Pro, you'll either get a 6,510 milliamp hour battery or a 5,440 milliamp hour battery in certain European regions. I unfortunately have the smaller battery capacity, and yeah, the battery life isn't spectacular. It's okay, but yeah, definitely getting better battery life with the Oppo Find X9 Pro, for example, and with the X200 Ultra, to be fair. The X300 comes with either 6,040 milliamp hours or 5,360 milliamp hours, depending where you live. Weirdly, I've got the larger one, even though I got both of these X300 devices from the same place. So I've got a larger battery in here than I do in here, which is a little strange. But yeah, if you're worried about battery life, it might be worth looking at importing from a region with a larger battery. All of them give you 90 watt wired charging, and all of them give you 40 watt wireless charging, so no difference between the lot there. All 3 of these phones run Origin OS 6, but there are differences. Obviously, this is the Chinese ROM on the X200 Ultra, which has some slightly different features, but aesthetically quite similar. And these two run the global version of Origin OS 6, which means you get things like Circle to Search and Gemini, which are things that I use all the time, so I'm really glad they're there. But I did use the X200 Ultra as my main phone for quite a while. Quite easy to live with. You do get a Chinese version of Circle to Search, as well as some of these Blue LM features in the sidebar. And they do work in English, so you can use them, but it's not quite as handy as Google's version. Otherwise, very few complaints. For instance, I was still able to use Google Wallet and make mobile payments using the Chinese version of this phone. And almost everything works as expected. It won't work with a Wear OS watch if you use a Wear OS watch, but I don't. I think Android Auto works and everything, so there's not a huge amount of downsides to using the Chinese version. But let's talk about cameras, because that's the main focus of this video. We've got quite a different setup on each one. I'm not going to go through every individual spec, but the X200 Ultra has a 35mm equivalent main sensor, which is much more cropped in than the typical 23-24mm that you'll get on other phones like these ones. It also has a huge ultra-wide sensor, and the idea is that will kind of pick up the slack. So if you need a wider shot, you still got a really high quality ultra-wide that you can crop into like 23mm. And whether that works for you or not will depend on your shooting style. I quite like 35mm for photography, but terrible for vlogging, for instance. So there's upsides and downsides to that. Of course, 200 megapixel 1/1.4 inch periscope zoom, which is on both of these phones. Slightly newer version on the X300 Pro. Main camera specs are pretty much the same on the X200 Ultra and the X300 Pro, other than that focal length difference that we already talked about. Ultra-wide is going to be a lot smaller. It's a 1/2.76 inch sensor, so pretty tiny, which means it won't be anywhere near as good in low light, at least in theory. We'll see how it is in practice. You get the same ultra-wide on the standard X300. On this one, you get a 50 megapixel periscope telephoto instead of the 200 megapixel, and it's not quite as zoomed in. It's 3x rather than 3.5x. However, that 200 megapixel sensor that's used for the telephoto on these two phones is used for the main camera on this phone, which is quite an interesting choice. So you can take 200 megapixel snaps with the main camera, but obviously that's not going to be as much use for zooming in, because when you zoom in, you will switch to the 50 megapixel 3x. So yeah, be really interesting to see how these compare, especially with zooms and especially in low light. There are some differences in video shooting between these phones. So for instance, the Vivo X200 Ultra will let you shoot at 4K 120 on every single lens, and in Pro mode you can shoot log on every single lens, but only at up to 60 frames per second. The X300 Pro will let you shoot at 4K 120 on the main and the telephoto sensor, but it doesn't let you do it on the ultra wide. But if you go to Pro mode, you can shoot at up to 4K 120 with log enabled, which you can't with the Ultra. With the X300, you can shoot at 4K 120 but only on the main camera, and in Pro mode you can do 4K 120 in log, but again only on the main camera. And weirdly, at 4K 60 you can use the ultra wide and the main camera, but the telephoto is disabled when you're using log. If you turn off log, you'll have all your lenses. But yeah, weird little differences between all of them. I just thought it was important to show that because I don't think many people have. With that said, let's go outside and see how these cameras perform. Before we get into the comparison, I have a quick sponsored message, but don't skip ahead because I'm filming this on all three Vivo phones, trying out different settings, and it's a great chance to look at the quality in full screen 16:9. So stick with me and I'll be back in a sec.
UPerfect.
This video is sponsored by UPerfect and their G16 portable monitor. I'm sure you've seen monitors like this before. They're designed to be used with things like your laptop. You connect it with a single cable and it makes it way easier to get work done on the go. They're slim, lightweight, and really useful. The UPerfect G16 takes things a step further though. Not only does it have a bright and vibrant IPS panel with a smooth 120Hz refresh rate, but it also has a 10,800 mAh battery built in. This means you can hook it up to just about anything, and you won't need to plug it into the wall or use an external power bank. It makes using HDMI sources so much more convenient. I've been having a great time using it with my Miyoo Flip Retro handheld, as well as my Steam Deck, so I can enjoy my games on a spacious 15.6 inch display rather than a cramped little handheld screen. Another thing that makes the G16 stand out from the crowd is the fact that it's a touchscreen monitor. These days I'm shooting more and more content on my phones, and this monitor has been an absolute game changer. It gives me a massive display so I can make sure that my shots look perfect, and because it's touchscreen I can change all the settings right on the display without even needing to touch the phone. It's perfect when I'm shooting top-down hands-on content like the stuff you saw at the start of this video, or for when I'm shooting talking headshots like this one right now. Of course it's great for productivity as well. I love using it with my laptop, especially when I'm editing videos, as it's so much easier when you have a second display. Equally, it works amazingly with phones that support a desktop mode, like the Galaxy S25 Ultra or the Huawei Pura 80 Ultra. If you pair either of these with a little Bluetooth keyboard and this monitor, you basically got a tiny laptop. Very handy. If the UPerfect G16 sounds like an ideal upgrade to your tech setup, check out the link in the description. There's an exclusive discount code for my viewers, and using that you can save up to $60. Massive thank you to UPerfect for sponsoring this portion of the video, and now let's get back to the comparison.
UPerfect.
Okay, so as usual, we're starting on the selfie cameras. We're at 4K 30 frames per second, but all of them can do 4K 60 as well. And every single one has autofocus, so it don't matter if you get up real close or far away, It should keep you in focus the whole time. Previously, I haven't been too impressed with the X200 Ultra's stabilization on the selfie camera, but we'll see how it compares to the other two. Maybe it's better, maybe it's not. We're using the built-in microphones, and you'll see down on the screen which one you're listening to right now. No wind today, so shouldn't sound too bad. But yeah, which one's looking better? Of course, you can also use the rear cameras to film yourself. And with this setup, we're doing things a bit differently. The X200 Ultra has a really big ultra-wide sensor, but the main sensor is very cropped in, which means it's not ideal for vlogging shots like this one. So with the X200 Ultra, you're more likely to use the ultra-wide than the main camera if you're filming yourself like this. And the other two, you probably rather use the main camera. But all of these ultra-wides have autofocus. Right, so now I've cropped in digitally on the X200 Ultra to about 24mm, which is what the main camera on the X300 and X300 Pro is. So you should get a similar field of view, but I think they'll look quite different because you don't get as much background separation. Image quality wise, it shouldn't be a huge difference. But yeah, what do you think? And the reason I'm showing that off, I won't do this every time. If you use the actual main sensor on the X200 Ultra, it's 35mm, which is very close. And yeah, I just don't think it's ideal for vloggy shots like this one. But you do get a lovely soft background when you use the 35mm. You just kind of need a selfie stick or to hold the phone really far out to get a comfortable field of view. Both of the X300 series phones support portrait video at 4K 30 or 4K 60 on the selfie camera. The X200 Ultra only supports up to 1080p. Sorry about the plane. How are they doing with the cutout? This is a very challenging scene with lots of branches in the background, and I can see some errors. But when I don't wiggle my fingers about, it seems to do a good job with my face. And if you use the rear cameras, the X300 series phones will both let you do 4K 60 again. The X200 Ultra caps out at 4K 30, but it does let you use the ultra wide, whereas the X300 phones don't let you use the ultra wide. Now I'm going to push each phone out to its maximum digital zoom. So here's all our ultra wides, main cameras, telephotos. The X200 Ultra will go to a maximum of 460mm at 4K. Can't figure out what that is in times, but it looks about the same as the X300 Pro, which will go to 20 times, and the X300 will only go to 15 times. Sorry, they're not perfectly lined up, but they're quite close. Which one do you think is looking better, and which has the best stabilization? Okay, let's look at our rack focusing capabilities. We're focused at infinity across the reservoir now, and if I stick my hands in front, see how quick each one adjusts. Looks like they're all doing pretty good. Now moving on to the main camera. We'll do the same thing. Obviously the X200 Ultra has longer to pull focus because it's a more zoomed in lens, but it does have a good minimum focus distance, so it can do it. Now our telephotos. And they can all focus pretty close up. It looks like the X300 standard is a little bit quicker, but it doesn't have such a large or high resolution sensor as the other two. The other two are very smooth, but it does take them a bit longer to get there. Yeah, they're about identical as far as I can see. Okay, so let's test the image stabilization. We're starting on the ultra wide of each phone. I'm just walking along at a normal pace. Now here's a quick jog. This is the main camera of each, and obviously you can see the difference in focal length with the X200 Ultra. This is walking along normally, and here's a quick jog. Now our telephoto sensors, and the X300 isn't quite as zoomed in as the other two. This is walking along normally, and here's a quick jog. Okay, time for some nighttime tests now. We're back on the selfie camera at 4K 30. How do these compare? In the day, I thought the X300 phones looked pretty much identical. The X200 Ultra might be a bit different, but yeah, what do you think? Now moving on to the rear cameras, and we're starting on the ultra wide. Here the X200 Ultra should have a big advantage, but how much of a difference is it? And now the main camera of each. Hopefully I'm in frame on the X200 Ultra. How do these look? Okay, now a low light video zoom test. Starting on the ultra wide of all three phones. Moving into the main cameras. Now the telephotos. I'm going to use this sign in the distance and push out to our maximum zoom, which is about 20x on both the Ultra and the Pro, and the standard X300 can go to 15 times zoom. Which one is looking cleanest? I know they're not perfectly lined up, but we got the sign in all three frames, so should be good enough to compare. Okay, now let's check out the stabilization. This is walking along at a normal pace, and here's a quick jog. That was the ultra wides. Now moving to the main camera, walking along normally and with a quick jog. Now our telephotos. Here's walking along, and here's a quick jog. Okay, time for some extreme low light testing. We're starting on the selfie cameras at 4K 30 frames per second again. I'm not expecting these to look great, but if I walk towards the street light, maybe they'll look a little better. It's about as good as it's going to get. And if I keep walking and become backlit, I'll probably disappear again. Okay, now switching around to the rear cameras. We're starting on the ultra wides, and I expect the X200 Ultra is going to look a lot better than the others, but I can't see the screens right now. I'll just walk up to the street light ahead of me, so lighting will be a little bit better, and we'll see how these compare. Now with the main rear cameras, and here the X300 series should catch up a bit. I'm backlit now. If I turn and face the light, things should look a little bit better. I'm expecting the X200 Ultra is uncomfortably close, but what can you do? Okay, now just a quick test of video stabilization. I'm not going to be running about in the dark, but we'll just walk along and see how these look. These are the ultra wides, and I can see on the screen that the X200 Ultra is a lot brighter than the other two. Okay, now the main cameras. Weirdly, the X200 Ultra looks very grainy. I'm not sure why that is. Let's move on to the telephotos. Okay, so let's look at some photos, and we're starting with a selfie on the selfie cameras. The Vivo X300 and the X300 Pro have essentially the same hardware for the selfie camera, so I'm not expecting we'll see much of a difference between them at all. The X200 Ultra does have slightly different setup though. It's actually a wider selfie camera, but it automatically crops in, so all of these are at 24mm, but I think it's actually like a 20mm selfie camera, and it's digitally cropped slightly, which is why my face shape looks slightly different. Not necessarily better or worse, but it's just different, you know. All three are looking incredibly sharp, but there might be some slight motion blur on the X300 Pro. I think that's just down to inconsistency because I was hand holding each of the phones and maybe my hand was shaking a slight bit more when I took that photo. Otherwise, it's pretty much identical to the X300 shot, which I do think looks the best overall. But the X200 Ultra is not far behind, and I could see some people preferring it. There's really not a massive difference, at least in the daylight, between these selfie cameras. Slight difference in colour, but again, not massive. I do think I maybe slightly prefer the X300 series colours. Like the sky looks a bit purpley on the X200 Ultra, but yeah, not much of a difference here at all. Now the same shot but with portrait mode turned on, and apologies, I accidentally left the swirly bokeh mode turned on the X300 Pro, but at least it gives us something to talk about because otherwise the X300 and the X300 Pro should look about identical. The cutout looks pretty flawless on all of them, and image quality, as you'd expect, is about the same as when you have portrait mode turned off. I do like that the X200 Ultra is doing some slightly more interesting things with the bokeh. I think the X300 blur it looks pretty basic, you know. Doesn't look bad, but I think there's just a bit more character to the X200 Ultra shot. And there's even more with the X300 Pro with that swirly bokeh mode, but I could always turn that on the X300. Again, really too close to cool. I think these all look about as good as each other. Maybe slight edge to the base X300 again for me, just in terms of colors and skin tones, but it's very, very close. Now flipping the phone around and using the ultra wide rear camera, we should see a pretty big difference here. Not between the X300 series phones, they have the same sensor, so they should look about identical again, but the X200 Ultra has a much larger sensor, so in theory it will look better. You can clearly see the background is a little blurrier on the X200 Ultra shot because of that larger sensor, but because it's an ultra wide, it's not dramatic. Everything still looks pretty in focus. If we zoom really far in, the X200 Ultra does look slightly more detailed, a little bit sharper, but it's not a dramatic difference, I don't think. I think really to see the benefit of that larger sensor on the ultra wide, you have to be shooting at night. In the day, it makes a difference. Slightly softer background, slightly more detailed, but not a massive leap. Now the main cameras, and there's a big difference between all of them here. We've obviously got the 200 megapixel main on the X300, the 24mm 1/1.3-ish inch sensor on the X300, and the 35mm version of a similar sensor on the X200 Ultra. As I said in the video section, it can make shooting yourself quite difficult using a 35mm sensor. I do really like it when I'm shooting other people or when I'm shooting street scenes. It's a very natural field of view. Just makes it a bit difficult to vlog with and things like that. But if you manage it, you do get this lovely soft background from the extra compression of the lens. Like looking at raw specs, you would expect a softer background from the X300 Pro because it has a wide aperture, but that focal length really changes how soft the background is. Still really soft with the X300 Pro and slightly less so with the X300, but not a dramatic leap. It's a 1/1.4 inch sensor, so a little smaller, but not too much smaller. The advantage the X300 should have is in its detail. It's got way more pixels than the other two, and you know what? It does look slightly sharper and more detailed than the X300 Pro, but I don't think it's really an improvement on the X200 Ultra, and that might just be because the X200 Ultra is more zoomed in. However, on skin tones, the X200 Ultra looks way better here to me. Bit more colour in my cheeks. I look really pale in the other two shots, especially the X300 shot. And normally I'd expect the opposite because it's a Chinese ROM and they're known for whitening skin tones, but I'm seeing the opposite here, which is interesting. For me, the X200 Ultra looks the best, but as I said, it can be challenging if you're trying to shoot yourself, not with a gun, with a camera. Okay, so now we're going to push through the zoom range, testing out all the different focal lengths and going to our maximum zoom on each camera. Starting with the ultra wides here. So the X300 and X300 Pro should look identical. X200 Ultra should, in theory, have an advantage. And as expected, the X300 phones look about the same. The X200 Ultra has very different colors, and I can see it looks a bit punchier down in this foliage at the bottom. Zoom in a bit. The X200 Ultra definitely looks the sharpest, but I'm not sure how much of that is sharpening and how much of that is the actual lens. Yeah, I'm not seeing a massive difference between these. I think the colors are slightly more natural on the X200 Ultra, but I'm only talking really about the foliage here, because I do think the sky is a bit too dark. Either way, we're splitting hairs. There's not a huge difference in quality between the three. Now main cameras, which again is where we should see our biggest difference in image quality, and yet they all look slightly different, but it's hard to say which one's looking better. The X300 looks sharper than the X300 Pro for sure. You can see that especially with this bank going down to the reservoir over here. There's more detail retained, whereas the X300 Pro is more mushy. And I think the X200 Ultra might be the most detailed of the three, I think. I like that we've got a nice example of the compression here as well. This branch in the foreground is all blurry because the extra compression of that longer focal length, whereas everything's pretty much in focus on the other two. For me, I think the X200 Ultra has the edge there. Not a huge difference, but a difference. And again, the colors are slightly different across all three. And going purely on colors, I think I prefer the tones of the X300 Pro, but it's extremely marginal again. Now this is at about a 2x digital crop. Talking in terms of like 2x, 3x doesn't really work on the X200 Ultra because it's 35mm main. But either way, we're at about 50mm on all of them. Here, I'm expecting the X300 to have a big advantage because it's got the highest resolution main sensor. And this is really one of the only focal lengths where you'll be using that extra resolution, because once you go past 3x zoom, it's going to switch to the telephoto. Weird setup, I think, but which one's looking best? Colors are a bit different on all three again. X200 Ultra and X300 are very close. X300 Pro, kind of a bit too purpley, or a bit, yeah, I don't know, the sky looks a little odd, but it doesn't look bad. Do a big zoom in. Yeah, you can see the difference here. Obviously, when you're zooming this far on a 12 megapixel JPEG, none of them are going to look brilliant, but I can clearly see more detail is captured with the X300 base model. I think the X200 Ultra is close, very close, but I think there's a slight edge to the X300 base model, and the X300 Pro is at the back of the pack. Are they all good images? Yeah. Are they all really similar? Yeah, but the X300 has the most detail in this case. Now moving on to our telephotos. The specs are essentially the same with the X300 Pro and the X200 Ultra, but the X300 Pro is using a newer version of the sensor as well as a newer image processing chip. The X300 has the smallest and lowest resolution telephoto, and it's also not as zoomed in, so I'm expecting that to do the worst. But how much of a difference does it make? Different colors again on all three, and you can really see the effect of the larger sensor on these two on the right. All these branches in the foreground are out of focus, where they're much more in focus on the smaller sensored X300 base model. And if we do a big zoom in, I think the X200 Ultra might be looking the best. Or not. No. It's between the X200 Ultra and the X300 Pro. Not a huge difference here, but there's definitely less detail with the X300 base model. And I think we'll see that more exaggerated as we continue to zoom further. So here's 10 times zoom, and we'll zoom around the same spot. So here you can see a pretty pronounced watercolor effect from the X300, where it's kind of guessing at textures. And that's present on the X300 Pro as well, but maybe to a slightly lesser extent. And I think the X200 Ultra is capturing the most detail, especially if we look at these signs here. You can't read them, but you can make out that there's like text on these signs. It's kind of, they've just been turned into like blurry lines on the other two phones. There's also some weird stuff going on with this sign here. It's become very distorted on the X300 and a little bit on the X300 Pro, but it's a bit clearer on the X200 Ultra. Now pushing into our maximum zoom, which is about 100x on all three phones, and there's a pretty huge difference here. Lots of AI processing at this zoom level, as you'd expect. X300 looks pretty terrible. Look how watercolory this car is in the center. There's like no semblance of detail. Like, yeah, a lot of this frame I think has been generated rather than captured. But for me, the X200 Ultra is looking most like a photo. So yeah, I think for long range zooms, all three do quite well. But the X200 Ultra seems to have the edge. And I think that's probably due to it being out longer, and Vivo's had more time to like optimize the software for the telephoto camera. I was expecting the X300 Pro to do better because it's got a newer version of the same sensor, but maybe they just need more time, more firmware updates to get the most out of it. Either way, X300 can't quite keep up with the other two, and X200 Ultra still has the edge. Okay, now on the other end of the spectrum, let's talk about macro capabilities. We'll go through all the lenses. We're starting on the ultra wides, and here it looks like I managed to get a little bit closer with the X300 than I did the X300 Pro, but I think that's just user error. I basically tried to get as close as I could while keeping my subject in focus. The X200 Ultra has the widest ultra-wide sensor, but it also can't focus quite as close as the other two. When we punch in a bit, you can see that the background's a bit blurrier from that larger sensor, and it's maybe slightly sharper, but like I've seen with the other daylight ultra wide photos, not a dramatic leap, just a very slight bit of extra detail and a slightly shallower depth of field, and it's slightly wider too. So yeah, X300 can get closer, X200 Ultra looks a bit better, take your pick. Now main cameras, I feel like the X300 base model can get the absolute closest, followed by the X300 Pro, followed by the X200 Ultra. Now in terms of colours, I'm definitely preferring the X300 series. I think these greens look much richer. The plant's a little too pale on the X200 Ultra. For me, I think the X300 Pro is looking the best overall. As always, not a massive difference between the three. I think the sharpness is probably best on the X200 Ultra, but I just don't think it looks very natural with those colors. So I give this one to the X300 Pro, but it's close as always. Now the telephoto cameras, and as you can see here, they can all pretty much get equally close, which is very impressive. Great macro capabilities on all of them. And I'm seeing the same thing with the colors again. The X200 Ultra just looks very washed out compared to the other two. Nice rich greens on the X300 series phones. But how does the detail hold up? For me, it's really close between the X300 models, but I think the X300 Pro has a slight edge. It just looks slightly sharper, and I quite like the slightly shallower depth of field, but it's real close, especially between the X300 models. They look really similar. Okay, so moving on to nighttime snaps now, and we'll start with some selfies. There will be a slight difference in color because I didn't take these all at the exact same time. There's like a video wall thing in the back that changes color, so there will be different colors in the frame. I'm not seeing a massive difference between all of these anyway. You can just see this light on my cheek, like it's more pink on this one, more orange on the X200 Ultra. That's just the changing of the video wall. In theory, the X300 series phones should look about identical, but I do think the X300 base model looks best here, and I thought that in the day as well. Can't really explain that, but I'm getting the best selfies from the X300 rather than the X300 Pro. And the X200 Ultra is not quite on the same level. I think it's particularly noticeable if we zoom in on my eye. It looks best on the X300, then the X300 Pro, and it's a bit grainy and like pixelated looking on the X200 Ultra. So yeah, X300 wins for some reason. Now in portrait mode, and they're all in the basic blur mode. I remember to turn the swirly bokeh off. And again, X200 Ultra has done the most dramatic bokeh balls in the background. Cutout looks spotless on all three of them. I'm seeing the exact same thing. The X300 base model is looking best. It looks sharpest. There's most detail on my hoodie here. X300 Pro is almost identical, but not quite as good. And the X200 Ultra looks okay, but it's I've got the same thing with like the graininess around my eyes. This looks a bit processed and weird. Now flipping the phones around and shooting with the main rear camera. These are quite interesting. X300 has gone mad with the AI processing. I look weird in that one on the left. I did have beauty mode turned off on all of them, so don't know what's going on there. Maybe it's trying to reduce noise, because you do have pretty small pixels with a 200 megapixel sensor, so maybe aggressive denoising has been replaced with swirly AI crap on my eyebrows and everywhere else. X300 Pro looks way more natural, looks quite nice, and the X200 Ultra looks great as well. I love how soft the backgrounds are on all of them, but especially on the X200 Ultra with that 35mm lens. Really like how contrasty this shot is as well. I think it looks great. X300 Pro is great as well, maybe just not quite as punchy. And the X300 is alright, but as you can see, less of that depth of field effect and weird details when you zoom in. For me, the X200 Ultra is still winning on the main camera, even in low light conditions. Now this is a portrait shot using the telephotos and using this mannequin in a window. There's a slight difference in colours. I feel like we've got more bluey tones in the shadows on the X300 Pro. And it does make me wonder if I accidentally left a different filter on that one, because the X200 Ultra and the X300 look really similar. Some interesting differences with the blur effect, although it might be more to do with the lens than the portrait effect, because these like specks of dirt on the glass of the shop window, you can see them on the X300 where they're blurred out on the other two. In any case, portrait cutout as always is looking pretty flawless, even with some reflections in in the foreground. I like that we got this out of focus reflection in the X200 Ultra shot up here. Not sure what that is, but it's not in the other two shots. If we zoom in on this bow tie, I think the X300 is looking the worst. Like, you can see it's doing some heavy processing. I think it's probably denoising again, but it looks unnatural compared to the other two. So the telephotos of the X300 Pro and X200 Ultra have the edge for sure. Here's a really weird thing. What's going on with the pocket square? Where are those dots gone on the Ultra? That is a mystery. I'll give this one to the X300 Pro because it didn't do the weird thing with the dots on the pocket square, and I think just the details look the best. Now another telephoto shot, this time of a close-up on this wreath. Again, we're seeing softer backgrounds from the X300 Pro and X200 Ultra, which makes sense with a larger sensor and a more zoomed in lens, but the X300 is still looking surprisingly good. And zooming in to look at all the small details, I think the X200 Ultra is looking the best. It's looking the sharpest. It's hard to judge colors. The X200 Ultra might be slightly too cool, but you can always bring the color temperature up a little bit when you edit your photos. Yeah, they're all quite good, but there's just a slight lack of definition from the X300 compared to the other two. I think, honestly, you'd be happy with any of these in reality, but I do think X200 Ultra looks slightly better than the other two. All right, now we've got a run through of all our lenses on this street scene that you've seen 1,000 times in all my videos. Starting with the ultra wides, interestingly, we got a bit of a difference in the way the colors have been rendered on the X300 series phones, but again, we are near that video wall, which could have been changing color and probably affecting things. In the center of the frame, I'm not seeing a massive difference in the level of detail or sharpness. I do think the dynamic range is slightly better on the X300 series phones, like especially this menu. I mean, obviously you can't read it, but it feels like you're closer to being able to read it than you are on the X200 Ultra. That said, if you look down at the ground down here, there's much better texture to the ground, and this wooden block, I can see more detail in this wooden block on the X200 Ultra than I can on either of the X300 series phones. It also looks a little cleaner, less mushy towards the edge of the frame down here. So the differences are pretty small. Oh yeah, look at this wood paneling as well. You can see all the texture of the wood paneling on the X200 Ultra, just mush on the other two. So it's a pretty small difference, but the larger sensor means it can use a lower ISO, which is going to result in less denoising, and that keeps some of them smaller details without looking too grainy. Now the main cameras, which should all look quite different. Colors are pretty close on the X300 series, bit colder on the X200 Ultra. Here I think the X200 Ultra has the edge again. It looks most detailed, but it is a little cold. Like these are very warm lights on the front of ZZ's, and that's come across more in the X300 series. But it's a more detailed shot on the X200 Ultra, and I don't think that's just because it's more zoomed in. It's just done a better job of keeping those textures intact. Now our telephotos. Same thing with the color. Colors are better on the X300 series. Bit too cold on the X200 Ultra, but not awful. Using this sign as kind of a benchmark, you can see it's way clearer on the X300 Pro and the X200 Ultra with that large 200 megapixel sensor. Everything's a bit softer on the X300. I'd say the X300 Pro did best overall because it's got the colors right and it's still got all the detail. But yeah, those two are pretty close. Now let's close with a trio of images from the really dark street. Starting on the ultra wides, none of these are looking great, but I think you can see a slight advantage with the X200 Ultra. It's definitely less noisy. Look at the sky in particular. The sky looks very blotchy and grainy on the X300 series shots, whereas it's a little bit cleaner, maybe slightly better dynamic range on the X200 Ultra shot, but maybe not quite as big a difference as I would have hoped for. You can see it's a slightly lower ISO, faster shutter speed, so you get less motion blur if there was any motion in the scene, but there's not. But yeah, the clarity's not incredible. Now main cameras, pretty nasty lens flare on the X200 Ultra and the X300, whereas much more controlled on the X300 Pro. The sharpening's very aggressive on the X300 Pro, which I don't really like the look of, but the X200 Ultra is really noisy, which I don't love either. And the X300 is somewhere in between, but I hate that lens flare. I'm going to give it to the X300 Pro because it controlled that lens flare better, and I think the sky looks quite decent, but none of these are too impressive. And finally, our telephoto cameras. I feel like the foliage back here is looking best on the X200 Ultra, but I don't like how it's crushed the shadows here. The dynamic range isn't great. Like, that's just all black, whereas you can see there's another tree on both of these shots. So dynamic range isn't great. Sky's looking pretty messy as on the X200 Ultra as well. Pretty close, this one. I think I'll probably give it to the X300 Pro again, but yeah, it's really dark. It's a really dark scene. None of them look particularly good. Okay, that's about it for this one. I hope you found it useful. I think these phones are really closely matched, which isn't too surprising. They're all Vivo phones. They all use the same image processing algorithms, so you do get similar results. The X300 Pro and X200 Ultra are clearly a cut above the X300, but if you want a smaller phone, then you really don't need to feel like you're making too many sacrifices. If you go for that one, you get very similar images. Plus the fact that it's a bit cheaper and comes in some really nice colors makes it a really appealing option. Overall, X200 Ultra probably has the best long-range zoom. I think X300 Pro is currently the best for video because it has more options than all the others. 4K 120 with log, for instance, which you can't do with the other two, at least not on all the lenses. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments, and if you like this kind of thing, get subscribed because there's always more phones on the way, and I will catch you in the next one. Toodles.